Right now, at this exact moment, Saudi Arabia has quietly opened its airspace to Israeli military aircraft preparing for strikes deep inside Iran. The Israeli Air Force claims it has secured overflight rights through Saudi territory for potential bombing runs targeting Iranian nuclear facilities and missile production sites. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Command issued a statement calling this development an act of war by Riyadh that will be met with immediate retaliation. This represents the first time in history that Saudi Arabia has officially permitted Israeli warplanes to use its airspace for offensive military operations, shattering decades of public antagonism and crossing a threshold that fundamentally reshapes Middle Eastern military geometry. Let me walk you through exactly what happened over the past 72 hours that brought us to this unprecedented moment. On Monday, March 2nd, at approximately 1,400 hours local time, a classified Saudi government directive was transmitted to the General Authority of Civil Aviation in Riyadh authorizing the creation of temporary military transit corridors across the kingdom's northern airspace. According to 3 Western intelligence officials speaking on condition of anonymity, this directive came directly from Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, following consultations with senior members of the Saudi royal family and military leadership. The corridors established flight paths running from Jordan's eastern border, across Saudi Arabia's Tabuk and Ha'il provinces, directly to the Iraq-Iran border, creating a direct aerial highway for Israeli strike aircraft to reach targets inside Iran without requiring aerial refueling over hostile or politically sensitive territory. By Tuesday morning, Israeli F-35I Adir stealth fighters from the 140th Squadron based at Nevatim Air Base conducted what Israeli defense sources describe as familiarization flights along the newly opened routes. Satellite tracking data analyzed by open-source intelligence monitors detected unusual transponder activity consistent with military aircraft movement along precisely the corridors specified in the Saudi directive. These flights did not cross into Iranian airspace, but brought Israeli aircraft to within 200 kilometers of Iran's western border, closer than any acknowledged Israeli military operation in recent history. On Wednesday at 0800 hours, Iran's Supreme National Security Council convened an emergency session in Tehran. According to reporting from Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency, which maintains close ties to the Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iranian military intelligence presented evidence to council members showing Saudi and Israeli coordination, including radar data, intercepted communications, and human intelligence from sources within the Gulf states. By 1500 hours Wednesday, Major General Hossein Salami, commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, held a press conference in Tehran announcing that Iran considers Saudi Arabia's decision to open its airspace for Israeli military operations as direct participation in aggression against the Islamic Republic and warning that any Israeli aircraft using Saudi airspace to strike Iranian targets will result in immediate Iranian retaliation against Saudi oil infrastructure and American military bases positioned across the Arabian Peninsula. To understand the military significance of Saudi airspace access, you need to understand the operational challenges Israeli strike planners face when contemplating deep penetration attacks against Iranian nuclear and missile facilities. Iran's most critical nuclear sites, including the Natanz uranium enrichment facility and the Fordow underground enrichment complex, are located between 600 and 1,000 kilometers from Israel's borders. Israeli F-35I Adir stealth fighters have a combat radius of approximately 1,100 kilometers with internal fuel, but conducting strikes at maximum range leaves minimal loitering time over targets and zero margin for engagement with Iranian air defenses or fighter aircraft. Previously, Israeli attack planners faced 3 problematic route options. The northern route through Turkish airspace became politically impossible after relations deteriorated between Ankara and Jerusalem. The central route through Syria and Iraq exposes Israeli aircraft to Russian S-400 air defense systems deployed in Syria and risked confrontation with American forces operating in Iraqi airspace who would detect the Israeli intrusion. The southern route required flying down the Red Sea, around Yemen where Houthi forces operate Iranian-supplied air defense systems, then north through the Persian Gulf, exposing Israeli aircraft to Iranian coastal radar networks for extended periods. Saudi airspace access transforms Israeli operational calculus completely. The new corridors reduce flight distance to Iranian targets by approximately 400 kilometers compared to alternative routes. More critically, the route keeps Israeli aircraft over friendly or neutral territory for 90% of the mission profile, significantly reducing detection risk and defensive exposure. Israeli strike packages can now reach Iranian targets with sufficient fuel reserves to conduct multiple attack runs, engage Iranian interceptors if necessary, and return to bases in Israel or emergency landing sites in Saudi Arabia or Jordan if required. The aircraft likely to conduct these missions represent the most advanced strike capabilities in Israeli inventory. The F-35I Adir, Israel's customized variant of the Lockheed Martin F-35A Lightning II, features Israeli-developed electronic warfare systems, weapons integration for Israeli precision-guided munitions, and enhanced communications equipment. The aircraft's low observable stealth design reduces radar cross-section to approximately 0.001 square meters, making detection by conventional radar systems extremely difficult until the aircraft is within 40 to 60 kilometers. Israel operates approximately 36 F-35I aircraft with plans to expand the fleet to 75 aircraft by 2028, providing sufficient numbers to conduct sustained strike operations. For bunker-penetrating strikes against hardened underground facilities like Fordow, Israeli planners would likely employ GBU-28 laser-guided bunker-buster bombs, capable of penetrating up to 30 meters of reinforced concrete before detonating. Israel also possesses domestically produced MPR-500 precision-guided penetrator bombs specifically designed for destroying underground facilities. These weapons, combined with advanced targeting pods and real-time intelligence, give Israel genuine capability to severely damage or destroy Iranian nuclear infrastructure that international inspectors have confirmed continues uranium enrichment activities. Here's why this matters strategically, and why Saudi Arabia's calculus has shifted so dramatically that Riyadh is willing to publicly align with Israel against Iran. From Saudi Arabia's perspective, Iran represents an existential threat that has only intensified since the collapse of the 2015 nuclear agreement and Iran's subsequent acceleration of uranium enrichment to 20% and 60% purity levels. Iranian-backed Houthi forces in Yemen have repeatedly struck Saudi oil facilities with drones and cruise missiles, including the devastating September 2019 attacks on Abqaiq and Khoury's processing facilities that temporarily removed half of Saudi oil production from global markets. Iran supports Shia militant groups across the Gulf region, maintains extensive influence in Iraq and Syria, positioning forces on Saudi Arabia's northern approaches, and has made clear its intention to dominate the region regardless of Saudi interests. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's modernization agenda for Saudi Arabia, branded as Vision 2030, requires sustained oil revenues, massive foreign investment, and regional stability. Iran's aggressive posture threatens all three pillars. The Crown Prince has apparently calculated that tacit cooperation with Israel against Iran serves Saudi interests better than maintaining the fiction of Arab-Israeli enmity while Iran grows stronger. This represents a fundamental shift in Saudi strategic thinking, prioritizing Sunni Shia and Arab-Persian dynamics over Arab-Israeli conflict. From Israel's perspective, Iran's nuclear program represents an unacceptable strategic threat that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed will never be permitted to produce nuclear weapons. Israeli intelligence agencies assess that Iran has accumulated sufficient enriched uranium that with further enrichment to weapons-grade 90% purity, Tehran could produce enough fissile material for multiple nuclear weapons within months. Israeli military doctrine holds that Iran in possession of nuclear weapons fundamentally alters regional power balances in ways that threaten Israel's qualitative military edge and potentially its survival. Successive Israeli governments have maintained that military action remains a viable option to prevent Iranian nuclear breakout. According to Dr. Emily Landau, senior researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, the convergence of Saudi and Israeli interests against Iran has been developing quietly for years, but required specific conditions to manifest publicly. Saudi Arabia needed sufficient confidence that American security guarantees remained credible, while simultaneously recognizing that Washington, under multiple administrations, has shown limited willingness to directly confront Iran militarily. Israel needed regional partners who could provide operational support, including airspace access, intelligence sharing, and potential search and rescue capabilities if aircraft are downed over or near Iranian territory. The timing of this development is not coincidental. Iran recently announced it has begun enriching uranium to 84% purity at the Fordow facility, a level that serves no peaceful purpose and sits just below the 90% threshold required for weapons production. International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors confirmed this enrichment activity, but noted that Iran continues blocking their access to several suspected nuclear sites. Simultaneously, Iran has been transferring advanced ballistic missiles and drone technology to Houthi forces in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and militia groups in Syria and Iraq, creating a network of precision strike capabilities surrounding Israel and Saudi Arabia. From Iran's perspective, this Saudi-Israeli cooperation represents the nightmare scenario that Tehran has long warned against. Iranian strategic doctrine holds that the country's security depends on preventing regional coalition formation against it. Iran has invested decades building proxy networks, developing indigenous military capabilities, and cultivating relationships with Russia and China specifically to deter or defeat potential hostile coalitions. Saudi Arabia opening its airspace to Israeli warplane strikes at the heart of Iranian deterrence strategy by demonstrating that Iran's regional influence campaigns have failed to prevent its primary adversaries from operational military cooperation. Iranian military planners now face the reality that Israeli strike aircraft can reach Iranian territory with significantly reduced warning time and increased operational flexibility. Iran's air defense network, while extensive, remains vulnerable to saturation attacks by advanced stealth aircraft employing electronic warfare and standoff precision weapons. Iran operates Russian S-300 PMU, two air defense systems with maximum engagement ranges of 200 kilometers, but these systems struggle to detect and track low observable aircraft like the F-35. Iran's domestically produced Bavar 373 air defense system, claimed to match S-400 performance, remains largely unproven in combat and exists in limited numbers. There are three possible scenarios for how this situation develops over the coming weeks and months. Scenario 1 involves diplomatic de-escalation, where international pressure and back-channel negotiations convince both Israel and Iran to step back from the brink. This pathway has approximately 30% probability. For diplomatic de-escalation to succeed, Iran would need to accept enhanced IAEA monitoring and verifiable caps on uranium enrichment, while the United States would need to offer meaningful sanctions relief and security guarantees. Saudi Arabia would need to maintain plausible deniability about airspace arrangements, while Israel would need to accept that military action remains option of last resort rather than imminent operation. The challenge is that all parties currently believe their positions are strengthening rather than weakening, reducing incentive for compromise. Scenario 2 involves controlled military escalation, where Israel conducts limited precision strikes against specific Iranian nuclear facilities using the Saudi Air Corridor, potentially with tacit American approval or coordination. This scenario has approximately 45% probability. The strikes would target above-ground enrichment facilities at Natanz and possibly advanced centrifuge manufacturing sites near Karaj, causing significant damage to Iran's nuclear program while avoiding large-scale casualties or attacks on leadership targets. Iran would conduct symbolic retaliation through proxy forces, possibly striking Israeli targets through Hezbollah in Lebanon or attacking American bases in Iraq through militia groups, but would avoid direct Iranian military action that could trigger full-scale war. Both sides would engage in aggressive rhetoric while working through intermediaries to establish de-escalation parameters. Saudi Arabia would publicly deny knowledge of Israeli aircraft using its airspace, while privately coordinating with Washington and Jerusalem to manage Iranian response. Scenario 3 represents catastrophic escalation, where Israeli strikes kill Iranian nuclear scientists or Revolutionary Guard commanders, or where Iranian air defenses successfully shoot down Israeli aircraft over Iranian territory, creating prisoners or casualties. This nightmare scenario has approximately 25% probability. Iranian hardliners would demand massive retaliation, including ballistic missile strikes on Israeli cities. Activation of Hezbollah's estimated 150,000 rockets and missiles targeting Israeli population centers, and attacks on American forces throughout the region. Israel would conduct sustained bombing campaigns against Iranian military infrastructure, Revolutionary Guard facilities, and potentially leadership targets. Saudi Arabia would come under direct Iranian attack, including strikes on oil facilities, desalination plants, and possibly Mecca or Medina to punish the kingdom for betraying Islamic solidarity. The United States would be drawn into direct military conflict with Iran, conducting air and naval strikes while attempting to keep the Strait of Hormuz open for commercial shipping. Within 2 weeks, regional war involving Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United States becomes reality with global economic consequences, including oil prices exceeding $150 per barrel and potential recession. Watch for 5 critical indicators over the next 72 hours that will reveal which scenario is materializing. First, Israeli military mobilization patterns. If Israel begins calling up reserve units, particularly specialized units like the 669 Combat Search and Rescue Squadron, offensive operations are likely imminent. Second, American carrier positioning. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group is currently in the eastern Mediterranean. If it moves toward the Persian Gulf or if additional carriers deploy to the region, American military coordination with potential Israeli strikes becomes more probable. Third, Iranian diplomatic communications. If Iran requests emergency UN Security Council meetings or initiates direct communications with Saudi Arabia through Omani intermediaries, Tehran is seeking off-ramps rather than escalation. Fourth, oil market reactions. If Brent crude prices spike above $95 per barrel and maintain that level for 48 hours, markets are pricing in significant probability of military conflict disrupting Gulf oil production. Fifth, Russian and Chinese diplomatic activity. If Moscow or Beijing begin evacuating diplomatic personnel from Tehran or Riyadh, they possess intelligence suggesting imminent military action. Saudi Arabia has fundamentally reshaped Middle Eastern geopolitics by choosing alignment with Israel over maintaining rhetorical opposition. Iran now faces hostile coalition formation with operational military cooperation. Israel has acquired capabilities making previously impossible strike options against Iranian nuclear facilities tactically feasible. I am monitoring this minute by minute through satellite imagery analysis, military communication monitoring, and sources within regional defense ministries. When Israeli aircraft move, when Iranian missile units activate, when American forces reposition, you will understand the significance here before mainstream media recognizes something is happening. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on all notifications. What happens in the next 72 hours determines whether we witness the final phase of preventing Iranian nuclear weapons or the beginning of the most destructive Middle Eastern war in generations. Drop a comment. Will Saudi Arabia maintain this position if Iran threatens direct retaliation against Saudi oil infrastructure? Does Israel actually intend to conduct strikes, or is this elaborate deterrence signaling? Has the United States given explicit approval for Israeli military action, or are Jerusalem and Riyadh acting independently? I read every comment because your analysis matters. The flight corridors are open. Strike packages are ready. Iran is enriching uranium to weapons-grade levels. The next 72 hours determine whether diplomacy prevents catastrophe or whether we witness the first military force against a nuclear program since Israel destroyed Iraq's Osirak reactor in 1981. The clock is running. Everything hangs in the balance.